Following is sponsored programming and does not necessarily reflect the views or opinions of KHTS or its ownership.
Does God want a separation of church and state? Should Christians be voting biblical principles? Does it really matter who you vote for? Join Pastor Jerry Cook as he endeavors to answer these and many other questions over the next hour on Politics in the Pulpit. And now, Pastor Jerry Cook.
Good afternoon, and no, I do not have classified documents anywhere on my person or place of business. You are listening to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station, 98.1 FM and AM 1220. This is your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook, the pastor of the Freedom's Way Baptist Church. 21 years this coming March. Amazing, but yet I still look great. Boy, isn't this classified document thing getting weirder and weirder by the day? And I mean that seriously. I've been wanting to kind of talk about this a few weeks ago, and it's just developing so quickly. We keep hearing that Joe Biden takes classified documents very seriously, but yet they keep turning up in odd and rather unlocked locations, like his garage behind his Corvette. As of yesterday, we found out even more interesting information that former Vice President Mike Pence had classified documents in his possession. All of a sudden, it's chic to have classified documents. In my opinion, I think finding documents at former Vice President Pence's residence, in my opinion, cancels out any possibility of Trump, Biden, or even Pence from being prosecuted under a special counsel. Just my opinion. Now, I could be wrong, but to sort this mess out, next week we will be joined by attorney Alexander Haberbush. Say that with your, hold your tongue with it, saying that. With Lex Rex Institute for Law and Justice. And we'll talk about what we know and what could be turned up between now and next week. And guess what? It's a fluid story. It's literally changing by the day. And by the way, do you watch any of the White House press briefings with Jean-Pierre? It is ridiculous. It's almost comical. Depending on who you listen to on talk radio, whether it be Bongino or Mark Levin or Dennis Prager, depending on who you listen to, they will say, and I would concur with this, that Karine Jean-Pierre is probably the worst White House press secretary that we've had in the history of our country. Every time Peter Doocy or one of the individuals from the other alphabet news channels ask a question about the classified documents, she will deflect, she will refuse to answer, or she will say something like, I would refer you to such and such to get the answer to that. Do you know that she is paid by U.S. taxpayer dollars? She doesn't work for the White House officially, even though she's the spokesman. She's actually paid by our White House, by our taxpayer dollars, and she is supposed to be the spokesman to give us information about the current regime. And she is so inept at her job. And we know why she's the White House press secretary. She's black. She is a lesbian. And I think that's about basically her qualifications. And again, I'm not suggesting that those things are bad. I'm just simply saying that those are her basic qualifications. She's just not good. Now, Peppermint Patty, the one they had before her, I forget her name right now. She's now over on MSNBC. She was actually pretty good. And what was her name, Matt? Huckabee? No, not Huckabee. That's for Trump. Stick to your sports things, Matt. What are you do, Huckabee? Come on. Anyway, nevertheless, Peppermint Patty before Jean-Pierre did a much better job, even though I didn't like her either. But she was able to lie so much better than the current White House press secretary. But anyway, we'll hash that out, because I'm sure between today and next Wednesday there are going to be all kinds of new things and interesting revelations that are going to turn up. And so we'll be speaking with attorney Alexander Haberbush with the Lex Rex Institute for Law and Justice. So we're looking forward to that. Now, today on Politics and the Pulpit, we are going to center our attention on all things Genesis. That's right. Just like last Wednesday, we kind of talked about the pulpit part of Politics and the Pulpit, and today we're going to kind of do the same thing. We're going to talk about all things Genesis, or, if you will, if you like alliteration, we're going to talk about Darwin, dinosaurs, and dogma. We're going to try to answer questions like this. Is the Earth billions of years old? Or is the Earth several thousands of years old? We'll answer questions, or at least try to answer questions like, did man evolve over millions of years of time and chance into humans? Or was man created by an intelligent designer, namely the God of the Bible? And here's a nagging question that some people might have. If man did evolve over millions of years of time and chance, why don't we have transitional forms to observe? Or why aren't at least some of the 7+ billion people on planet Earth half transitioning or evolving before our very eyes? In other words, if we evolve from amoebas to monkeys to college professors, then exactly why can't we find a transition? Why can't we find a human with a monkey arm or a tail falling off or something like that? Why can't we see that? Again, those are questions that will be answered by our guest today, who is yet to call in, Creation Ministries founder Russ Miller. Russ Miller is going to be with us this coming Sunday at Freedom's Way Baptist Church for all 3 services. So this is my quick shameless plug here, and we'll probably do this at the very end of the program. But Russ will be with us this coming Sunday, January 29th at 9:15 a.m., at 10:30 a.m., and 5 p.m. as well. He's going to be answering some questions during the 5 o'clock service. So if you are someone that's skeptical of all things the Bible, and whether the Genesis account is true or not, we'll definitely try to field some of those questions. I have known Russ Miller probably for 15 years. His ministry, Creation Ministries, is actually centered in the Flagstaff, Arizona area. Technically, he lives just south of Flagstaff, Arizona, but he lives in ironically, a volcanic crater, and it's true, and I'll let him say this for himself when he gets on the phone here in a minute. But he lives in a crater. He lives off-grid. He does some things called off-grid creationists, which is kind of neat, where he just kind of does a few things around the property, and as he's chopping wood or as he's putting things away on the property, he talks about various things via creation. Again, off-grid creation. I think the call's coming in there, Matt. But nevertheless, we are going to have Russ here to talk about the book of Genesis and about whether transitional forms are, in fact, an interesting thing at all. So, here we are, just about to transition over to Creation Ministries founder Russ Miller. Russ Miller, are you there? All right, Russ Miller, are you there?
Hey, I'm there. Are you?
I am. Tell us a little bit about Creation Ministries, Russ, if you would.
Well, sure. Creation Ministries, actually it's Creation Evolution and Science Ministries is the official name, and creationministries.org is our website. We started this about 23 years ago, my wife and I, and we, at that time, had a nationwide business. We were planning on retiring early and goofing off the rest of our lives. We were involved in our church quite a bit, and at that time, a few years before that, I'd been a Theistic Evolutionist. God led me to the information that I now share with others. It really made an impact on me, and the more I spoke with other people, I saw the impact it was having on them, realized that there's just a lot of confusion out there because of what's being taught in public schools and colleges about Darwinism and its foundation of millions of years of time. Once I started understanding the issues with that and how really the biblical accounts really fit with the science the best, I started sharing that with others, and eventually we gave our business away to a fellow who'd worked for me for about 14 years, and we went cold turkey into this ministry, and we've been doing it. This is now the start of our 23rd year, and God's opened a lot of doors for us. We do a lot of different things. We speak in churches, and I used to speak quite a bit on college campuses and other conferences we speak at, and we started doing Grand Canyon tours based on biblical creation about 22 years ago. And we do Grand Canyon tours, quite a few throughout the spring and summer, and they're real God-edifying and godly glorifying trips. And, of course, I came and met you probably, I'm going to say at least 15, maybe 18 years ago, and have been out and blessed to speak with you and your church family several times over the years. God opened the door for us to biblical creation and prayer were kicked out of our public schools back in 1963. And since that time, kids have been taught they evolved without God. And a Christian school out of Phoenix that is accredited, that's called exemplary accreditation status, which means if a public school kid takes one of their online courses, they can use it as an elective credit toward high school graduation in the public school system. And they asked me to put together a Creation Evolution course, and we did. And kids can actually take it online, even if they're in public school, and get credit toward their graduation. So that's the first time the teaching of biblical creation has been in our public schools in 60 years. So God's opened doors for us to do different things, and I'm looking forward to coming out to California and visiting with you guys this weekend.
Well, one thing we can promise you here in Southern California is we will not have 4 to 5 feet of snow for you to slush through.
Yes, we've had a couple of challenges here. I live in northern Arizona, a great place to live. I live in a extinct volcanic crater, and it's about a mile and a half across in diameter, and they plow the roads down into the crater, but then they don't plow the roads that go out like to where our house is. And we've had 5 feet of snow in the last 3 weeks, and right now I cannot drive out of here. So it's a long story, but I will make it there this weekend.
Well, obviously, a wonderful 5 feet of snow to look from the great creator who gave you the snow. But nevertheless, one of the things you mentioned there at the beginning, Russ, was that you were, past tense, a theistic evolutionist. I know that in Christianity today, especially in broader evangelicalism, Hugh Ross is kind of a popular name, and he's kind of a huge proponent of theistic evolution. But can you just, for the sake of our listeners, just explain briefly what theistic evolution is and really how much of a compromise that is really to evolution as opposed to the Bible?
Yes. In fact, it's really, I think, a very important issue. It is somewhat subtle because it's so accepted, but it could be devastating at the same time. And I'm certainly not attacking anyone who is a theistic evolutionist or a progressive creationist or a gap theorist or any of the other compromised positions. But let's talk about that for a minute so somebody listening might understand where this leads. A theistic evolutionist, I came out of college with 174 college credits. All you're taught is evolution. And I just figured God must have used evolution to get us here.
Yeah.
And millions of years of time. In fact, probably over 90% of Christian seminaries and colleges teach this type of thing today. That doesn't make it right.
Yeah.
That's the key. Does that make it right? And the answer is no. We have to look at God's word. And what I like to point out, Pastor Cook, is that the science is actually on our side, but unfortunately, very few people, I should say, get to see that type of information. But a theistic evolutionist thinks that God used millions and millions of years of death and suffering to slowly get us here through a process of evolution. Now, a progressive creationist thinks God used millions of years of death and suffering to slowly create us. The gap theorist thinks that there was a different creation that God destroyed because of Satan and his minions had messed it up so bad. And that's where they pick up with Genesis 1, verse 2, and the biblical creation which is odd because at the end of the biblical creation, God calls it very good, but evidently left it full of Satan and his minions, which he just destroyed the other creation because of. So those things, they don't make sense, but all of them were invented within the last 200 years. It was 200 years ago, give or take a year, that the old earth beliefs that are literally worshipped today were invented. So people need to realize the old earth beliefs are a relatively new invention. And they were popularized only about 150 years ago, but they came up with what's called the geologic column or time scale just about 200 years ago. And it's basically a drawing of the stratified layers of rock that make up the majority of the Earth's crust. You know, folks, if you've been driving along a highway and you go through a cut in a highway, you'll see the stratification, the big thick layers. I think people know what I'm talking about when I'm saying the rock layers or the strata layers that make up the crust of the Earth. So, like, if you're looking at the side of the wall of Grand Canyon, you have 10 big primary layers that make up the walls, from the Kaibab limestone down to the peat sandstone at the bottom. So those are the stratified layers. Now, the old Earth beliefs are based on the belief that they form slowly and uniformly at the rate we see them form today, which is about 1 inch per 1,000 years.
Yeah.
They think it's always been the same, uniformity, and they did not in any way, shape, or form quickly during a global flood. So they claim uniformity and deny the global flood. And Pastor Cook, you know this, but the interesting thing with that is in 2 Peter 3, verses 3 through 6, given to us about 1,900 years ago, we were told that in the last days, non-believers would claim uniformity and deny the global flood. And that is exactly what they're doing. So the old Earth beliefs are all based on the Earth's crust, those stratified layers, having formed slowly and uniformly, so they have to deny the global flood. What I show people is, had there been this global flood where the fountains of the deep erupted, and the flood lasted over a year, by the way, they would have eroded the top 1 to 2 miles, of the Earth's original crust, and the moving waters would have separated the grains that made up all those sediments by grain size, weight, and density. You know, picture a miner and he's mining for gold with a pan. And he scoops up some sediments and some water. He sloshes it back and forth. Well, the moving water separates the sediments in his pan by grain size, weight, and density. Gold, being the densest, falls to the bottom. Well, on a global scale, those waters would have been rolling across the Earth, separating the sediments by grain size, weight, and density. So in the second half of the flood, as the waters started to abate, they started to recede, they would have started laying those sediments back down. But at that time, the sediments were separated. So you'd have all shale layered together, all mudstone layered together, all sandstone together, all limestone together. And you would have these stratified layers separated by grain size, weight, and density, making up the crust of the Earth if there had been a global flood. And those layers would be full of billions of dead things that were drowned and buried so quickly they didn't even have time to rot away or get eaten by scavengers. And
Yeah.
you know, today the crust of the Earth averages a mile deep of these stratified layers full of the dead things that we call fossils, and that's exactly what would be here had there been a global flood. So the biblical view fits what we actually see and observe scientifically, but today the secular side owns the system, and the old Earth beliefs based on no global flood, they are now the foundation for Darwinism, naturalism, humanism, secularism, and unfortunately, theistic evolution, progressive creation, etc.
Yeah, I know that some churches around here, happen to have a lot of Hugh Ross's materials, and I'm always encouraging them to at least look at a different perspective, because for some reason they think that it's more intelligent to believe the progressive route or the theistic route. And I always tell people, I says, we're not here to impress the secularists. We're here to stand up for what's right and impress our Lord Jesus Christ. But nevertheless, it is amazing to see that. But when we return on Politics in the Pulpit, we're going to be talking again with Russ Miller with Creation Ministries. And we're going to talk a little bit about the Grand Canyon, transitional forms. How come we don't see any transitional forms today? Why isn't there somebody walking around with a monkey arm or something like that? And also Noah's Ark and dinosaurs. So when we return here on Politics in the Pulpit, we'll talk to Russ here and ask him some of those questions when we return here on your hometown station, AM 1220 and 98.1 FM.
Hometown, your hometown station.
All right, we're back here on Politics in the Pulpit on your hometown station. We're speaking to Creation Ministries founder Russ Miller out in the Flagstaff, Arizona area, calling us from his crater there in Arizona. The amazing crater there. Got 4 or 5 feet of snow. But Russ, before we got off the air there for just a few moments here, we were kind of teasing about the Grand Canyon transitional forms. I want to talk about transitional forms just for a quick second, or the supposed missing link. Why aren't we seeing, what is the evolutionary theory for why we aren't seeing people like in half transition? What's going on there? Why don't we see a half monkey man or something like that, unless, of course, we want to say it's Bigfoot?
Well, it's interesting because, of course, over the years, they've come up with what's been proven to be either 100% frauds, 100% mistakes, etc., claiming these various ape men from Ramapithecus to Piltdown Man, etc., and they've all been debunked as completely inaccurate. I'm being nice and not saying frauds, although that's what most of them have been. But, they've never found a transitional form of any kind. Of the hundreds of millions of species we have on our planet today, there's not a single half this, half that flopping around anywhere. And not only do we not find them living, we don't find them in the fossil record either. They're always running up the flagpole, some claim, and sometimes it'll be in the textbooks for 40 or 50 years before it's finally proven to be not an accurate representation of a transitional form. But they fool a lot of people. If you go into a biology book, I don't care, at any level, high school up to the PhD level of college, you'll find lots of drawings of the proofs for Darwinian change. Now, there's an old saying, Pastor Cook, it goes like this: Darwinists are experts at drawing things that never existed to support their theory that never took place.
Yeah.
And so you go into the textbooks and you'll notice their proofs are just about always drawings of, well, this is what it would look like if we ever found it. But they don't have any, and there's a reason for that. The transitionals are missing because Darwinian change is a scientific impossibility. It never happened.
Mm-hmm.
Most people are shocked to hear this, but there's never been a single viable example of Darwinian evolution found showing that it's actually taken place.
Yeah.
It's all hypothesis and drawings, and what they do find is, let's take dogs for an example. Dogs are a great example. People will say, so you don't believe in evolution? And I say, well, no. As a Christian and as a believer, I certainly believe that kinds will bring forth after their kind. I mean, dogs will bring forth various types of dogs.
Yeah.
I've lost count. We have something like 350 or more specific dogs today, but they're all dogs.
Yeah.
You'll never see a dog produce a non-dog. So the changes within dogs, let's say you get a brown dog and it begets a yellow dog, or a short-haired dog begets a long-haired dog. Those are just what you might call microevolution.
Yeah.
Changes within the same kind. It's best to get the word evolution out of there. Darwinists like to mislead people with that word. Darwinian change would be macroevolution. Now, these micro changes, micro adaptations, micro variations are just the changes within the kind, like within dogs. And it's interesting when you speak on college campuses, this would make a huge impact. I would show that the only thing we see are variations, dogs bringing forth dogs, and I would ask everybody, why is that important? And there'd just be silence as everyone kind of looked at me with a quizzical look on their face, and then I would point out that 10 times in the book of Genesis, we're told that plants or animals will bring forth after their kind.
Yeah.
And the only thing that real science has ever found, ever observed, is that kinds will only bring forth after their kind, with variations happening within the kind. But here's the key here. Between the micro changes, biblically correct microevolution is the only thing that science has ever observed, and never observed Darwinian macroevolution. The micro changes, micro variations within the kind are caused by the sorting or the loss of the parent's genetic information. So gene pools get weaker and weaker with these variations, the micro changes. And that's a process called genetic depletion or gene depletion. Now, Darwinian evolution needs massive amounts of new and beneficial genetic information being added to the parent's gene pool, not the loss of information. And real science, the believer's best friend, knows of no way for nature to add appreciable amounts of new and beneficial genetic information. And yes, I know all about mutation theory and all that. And mutations make things worse, not better. And I cover that quite well in my book, Cost, by the way, which is what that public school course, accredited course, is based upon.
Yeah.
But the micro changes are caused by the loss of information. And so this is how I've been showing people for 20 years how to scientifically debunk Darwinism in 4 seconds flat. Start your watch. Gene depletion plus natural selection makes Darwinism impossible. Stop your watch. See, if things are getting weaker and weaker, losing information through micro changes within the kind, through the loss of information, eventually they get so weak they die off.
Yeah.
Now, we call that natural selection. It's really a misnomer. There's no selector standing out there picking them off, but they lose enough information they won't survive, and they die off. And I call it God's quality assurance program. It keeps the corrupted gene pools that are getting weaker and weaker from corrupting all the gene pools and leading to the extinction of that particular species. It's really God's QA program.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you this question, just not necessarily off topic, but kind of more in the political realm here. You know, we've been in the last few years here in an environment of, trying to somehow resurrect the late 1960s with all the race riots and racism and things of that nature on the Democratic leftist side. I'm just wondering why nobody has brought up the origin of the species and the subtitle for the book, which is the preservation of favored races and the struggles for life. I'm just wondering why the left hasn't brought that up or has said that evolution itself is racist.
Well, I don't know how honest you want me to be here.
Oh,
but
please, be real honest.
the left have always been the racists.
Yeah.
They've always been the racists. It was the Democrats that owned slavery, that owned slaves. When the Republicans defeated them in the Civil War and outlawed slavery, it was the Democrats for 100 years that put in all the Jim Crow laws.
Mm-hmm.
You hear them talking about Jim Crow laws coming back if a Republican gets elected. The Democrats were the ones putting in the Jim Crow laws for 100 years. And then all of a sudden in the mid-1960s, they figured out that, as a slave owner, they had to provide minimal amount of food, clothing, and shelter for their slaves. And from that, they got money and power by stealing basically their work.
Mm-hmm.
I think finally in the mid-1960s, the Democrats figured out, hey, if we can lock people into welfare, they, whatever color their skin might be, we have to provide them with minimal amount of food, clothing, and shelter, and we can get conservatives to pay for half of that too. We'll tell the people it's because we love them and we care about them, and we'll lock them into welfare and poverty, and they'll vote for us, and we'll get our money and power.
Yeah,
and that's kind of where we are today, and it just breaks my heart. It breaks my heart when I see this taking place. Now today, if you get enslaved to welfare, it doesn't matter what color your skin is. Doesn't matter if you're white, brown, black, yellow, whatever. You get into this system where you're just getting enough to squeeze by on, but you can't afford to go out and get a job and lose that. And you're getting stuck between a rock and a hard place. And it just breaks my heart. A lot of good people are locked into that system, and it tears up families. And anyways, when the left calls, here's one thing you've got to realize with the left, and this comes from Saul Alinsky and his rules for radicals. Whatever you are doing, loudly accuse your opponents of it before you get caught. The Democrats, everything that they accuse other people of doing is what they are already doing.
Yeah.
When they were trying to charge Trump with holding back money from the Ukraine unless they went along with him, that's what Joe Biden and his son had already done.
Yeah.
They took millions from the Ukrainians, and Joe Biden threatened to hold back $1 billion in aid if they didn't stop the investigation into the company that was paying his son tens of millions of dollars.
Burisma.
Burisma. So on and on you can go. Every time they call somebody a racist, it's what they're already doing.
I think in reality, Russ, this subtitle for the book, Origin of the Species, is actually quite critical. And I think it needs to be highlighted as much as possible, that you would have a subtitle of a book called The Preservation of Favored Races. And of course, we just have to ask the logical question, well, who did Darwin think was the favored race? Well, if you read Origin of the Species, it's pretty clear. And so he also infers the evolutionary process in reference to the black people. He mentions things about their nose structure and their lips and things of that nature, which has lent this whole notion, that they evolved from monkeys, which is a racist thought. And again, all of that stems from Darwinian evolution.
Yeah, well, exactly. And going back to our first segment, we talked about the age of the earth. Jesus said you tell good from bad by the fruit.
Yeah.
By the results. The millions of years beliefs invented just 200 years ago set the foundation for Darwinian macroevolutionary beliefs. Without millions of years, they lose it all.
Yeah.
And so Darwin just took that theory and given millions of years and slow change, somehow we overcame the law of biogenesis and life started, scientific impossibility, by the way, and then we evolved to everything on Earth today through macro process, massive amounts of new and beneficial genetic information being added to gene pools, another scientific impossibility, and on it goes. So I wanted to mention that the age of the earth, why does it matter from a Christian standpoint? It has to do with when death entered the creation.
Yeah.
The hero for Darwinism and the all old earth beliefs is millions of years of death.
Yes.
And millions of years of time, all putting death first.
Yeah.
The biblical message, going back, the Darwinian message is millions of years of death brought you into the world. The biblical message is that man's sin brought death into the world, separating us from God, recurring our redemption through Jesus Christ. So all old earth beliefs, no matter how well-intentioned they may sound, like theistic evolution, gap theories, progressive creation, etc., all agree with the secular atheist position that millions of years of death existed before man. Again, that undermines the foundation of the gospel message, which is that our sin brought in death, separating us from God, and Jesus died on a cross, his shed blood covering our sin, and those who believe in him, who accept him, believe in him, spend eternity with him in heaven. And so it's a big issue, and it has a lot to do with the death issue.
Yeah. I know one of the things that has popped up recently within our congregation, because we've got a lot of new faces, which I'm sure a lot of those folks are excited to meet you this coming Sunday, but where do the dinosaurs fit in, Russ? Were there dinosaurs on Noah's Ark? How does that work? And talk a little bit about dinosaurs.
Okay, yeah, the dinosaurs, that it actually is a big issue. I have what I call the top 5 pillars of old Earth beliefs, or as I call them, death before Adam beliefs. The first is that there was no global flood. The second is the geologic column or time scale based on the belief that the layers formed slowly and there was no global flood. The third is radiometric dating based on having to pick the date that matches the geologic column that's based on the belief there was no global flood. The fourth is dinosaurs based on the stratified layer they're found in based on the geologic column that they formed slowly with no global flood. And the fifth is Grand Canyon based on the belief it formed slowly, not quickly during a, guess what, global flood.
Yeah.
So the global flood is a linchpin, but dinosaurs are one of the 5 top pillars. And during the service message on Sunday, I believe that's when I'm going to do Noah's Ark and dinosaurs. Is that correct?
Oh, somewhere around there. It'll definitely be Sunday. How about that?
It'll be Sunday. And, what I'll do is I'm going to show evidence that most people have actually heard or seen and not given it any thought. But the evidence of man and dinosaurs having lived at the same time is astronomical. Mm-hmm. And again, it's going to be things that most people have already seen and heard and just never really stopped and thought about what it meant. But a lot of folks don't realize this. It should be front page news, but it undermines the secular foundation and humanist foundation of millions of years. Is over the last 20 years, more than 50 non-fossilized dinosaur bones have been found. They're not fossilized, and they still have red blood cells, soft, flexible tissues inside of them. Dinosaur DNA has been found, and carbon-14, which is measured in carbon dating, has been found in them. Well, carbon-14 should completely decay away in less than 100,000 years. Yet the bones still have carbon-14 in them. So, I don't know, we'll talk about a lot of these things this Sunday. Never has a coal layer been found that doesn't still have carbon-14. Never has an oil deposit or natural gas deposit been found that doesn't contain carbon-14. Diamonds still contain carbon-14. That means all those things can only be a few thousand years old, not millions of years old. So we'll talk about a lot of these things, though, on Sunday. But dinosaurs are one of the big pillars, and our message, Noah's Ark and Dinosaurs, is really eye-opening. And the total message is that, hey, God's word is true. Yeah. Word for word and cover to cover. So we will go into some depth on that this Sunday.
I know that the left, we've got 2 minutes in this segment. We might have to carry you over, Russ, but I know the left, let me tee this up for us, and then we'll pick it up on the other end of the break here. But the left, of course, thinks that everything that's natural is evil. And, of course, I can't think of anything more natural than oil. And you kind of know where I'm going with this, Russ. But oil is very natural. And on the other side of the break, I want you to explain, and we won't have a very long segment at the end, for the next segment here, but just explain what oil is and why it's actually probably the most natural element that we could use for our vehicles and things of that nature. So when we come back here on Politics in the Pulpit, we're going to talk about oil and why it's good with creation scientist Russ Miller here on Politics in the Pulpit, here on your hometown station.
It's like no other station I've ever listened to. It's great.
Your hometown station.
All right, we're back here on Politics in the Pulpit speaking to creation speaker Russ Miller with Creation Ministries in Flagstaff, Arizona. This is your hometown station, AM 1220 and 98.1 FM. When we last left Russ here, we're talking about oil. And Russ, what's oil and why should we use it?
Well, it's a naturally occurring substance, and we find it in the stratified layers laid down by water during the global flood. And as I mentioned before, it's never been found that doesn't contain carbon-14, which is measured in carbon dating, which the interesting thing is that carbon-14 should decay away in measurable amounts in less than 100,000 years, yet oil still has it, which would indicate and would support the fact that oil is only a few thousand years old. But believe it or not, scientists still argue on the origin and where oil comes, what it originates from. Most of us have been taught that it's basically buried plant and animal life that turned to oil over, of course, millions of years of time.
Yeah.
Carbon-14 argues against that. There are scientists, and more people are starting to think that it also comes from, deep, dark bowels. Microorganisms play a role in it. We get fracking, and it's coming out of shale. So right now, there's actually a lot of controversy on exactly how and where it comes from. We think science knows everything. It's really amazing just how much we take for granted, but it's not really found later on. Some of the petroleum molecules, for example, they say look like the lipids found in bacteria cell membranes. So there's a lot of argument on where it comes from. But the key here is that it's found in stratified layers that were laid down by water, and the carbon-14 indicates it's only a few thousand years old. So that would be the main thing I would focus on. Natural gas, a very clean-burning form of energy. A lot of craziness out there today, and the things that are going on today, Pastor Cook, fit very well with what the Bible said would take place in the latter days, which I think we're into, and the key being when Israel became a nation again, in one day, by the way, as the Bible had prophesied. So, a lot of times people say to me, Russ, it must have been really interesting to live in biblical times. And I always say, hey, you are living in tremendously biblical times today.
Yeah. Well, one last thing before we let you go, Russ. Again, we're going to have Russ Miller with us here at Freedom's Way Baptist Church in Santa Clarita this coming Sunday, January 29th, 9:15 a.m., 10:30 a.m., and 5 p.m. Russ will have a whole flagon of books that you guys can access, and then, of course, you can actually engage Russ after the services and talk to him. But very quickly, let me set this up briefly. You're going to the Grand Canyon. You are looking down in the bottom, and there's the nice Colorado River, and then one of the park officials start telling us a nice story that over millions and millions of years, the Grand Canyon was carved by that river. In 2 minutes, explain why that's silly.
Well, of course, that's what they're taught, and that's all that they know. And, there's a couple of things. The canyon averages a mile deep, up to 18 miles wide, and 277 miles long. It doesn't cut into the plain. It goes through the Colorado Plateau. It doesn't cut into the flat plain. The area was uplifted, and the canyon is cut through the upwarp, the Kaibab upwarp, or Kaibab Plateau, as they call it. What people very few people have heard this, but I also show people at the canyon, I can show you where the original creation rock is, where the flood layers come in and lay on top of it. I can take you to where you can put your thumb on creation rock and your fingers on the first of the flood layers, that being the lowest layer there being the Pete sandstone. But Pastor Cook, the most amazing thing I can show people there is what is missing. Although when you're standing on the rim, it's a mile down to the river, what they don't talk about there is there used to be 2 miles of stratified layers above today's rim. 2 miles of rock layers have been cut and removed from that entire area, and God left 900-foot remnants at both of the 2 entrance points to the south rim. Cedar Butte to the south by Tucson, and Red Butte if you come in from the east, by Cameron. You come into by the Cameron Trading Post, and you'll see Cedar Butte, or officially Cedar Mountain, but it's Cedar Butte, and it's the sister butte of Red Butte. They're both 900 feet tall, the Moenkopi and the Chinle layers. And 65 miles north, you start picking up those missing 2 miles of rock layers that used to be above that area. 65 miles north, you come to the 2,000-foot tall Vermilion Cliffs. If you climb up on top of those and go 45 miles north, you come to the 2,500-foot tall cliffs where you find Zion, the white and gray cliffs. And if you climb up on top of those and go 45 miles north, you get to the 2,500-foot pink cliffs where we find Bryce. And that's geologically called the Grand Staircase. You drop down from Bryce to Zion to the Vermilion Cliffs, and those layers are gone. So there's a lot of really interesting things we can show at Grand Canyon that the secular side won't talk about, because you can't talk about Cedar Butte or Red Butte, because people are going to say, well, where did all those layers go?
Yeah.
Well, there's no way to explain those layers being removed except by flooding that was on a global scale. A global scale explains how the Earth's crust, the stratified layers laid down by a water form quickly, wiping out every old Earth belief that puts death before Adam and brings us to the truth of God's Word. And that's the reason Grand Canyon and dinosaurs and the flood and the age of the Earth are important for people to understand from a biblical worldview.
Very good. Now, Russ, if people want to get a hold of you or they want to see your information, where would they go online?
Best is to go to our website, creationministries.org, and they can watch our teachings on our videos. They can, if they want to get my book. I don't copyright my DVDs and thumb drives. I tell people, if you get our information, make 1 million copies, give them to everybody you know. Ask them to make copies. Let's get some information out there and change some lives. So they can find all those things and even watch my videos, my teachings on our website. And that, again, is creationministries.org. They can see our Grand Canyon tour schedule and all sorts of good things.
Okay. Well, we're looking forward to seeing you this Sunday, Russ. Hopefully you'll get here safe and sound. Thank you, Russ. And again, encouraged you guys to come out this Sunday to see Russ at the Freedom's Way Baptist Church, 9:15, 10:30 a.m., and 5 p.m. Real quickly, quick shameless plug before we come off today. You'll notice there's a hat sitting here on my desk called God Wins with a verse that is adjoining it. If you are interested in this, these are $20 a piece. Brand Moonshine, you Facebook her and try to get this through her. But it's a great testimony to the fact that in the end, God wins. Again, thank you for listening to Politics in the Pulpit today. Please come back next week and listen in as we talk a little bit about these evolving issue with the classified documents with Alexander Haberbush. And again, you're listening to Politics in the Pulpit here on your hometown station with your holy host, Pastor Jerry Cook. We'll catch you next week. Take care.